Hello and welcome to this final preview video of our reading and discussion of Hamlet. This just deals with the last scene, Act 5, which is an incredible act, in a play that's incredible. It's a two-scene act, this seven-scene act. The play is structured pretty oddly, to be honest. But anyway, when I do these last preview videos, and I just finished my Romeo and Juliet series, I always worry about how much to tell my students. So I teach high school, so they're not people that have read tons of Shakespeare. Even my seniors, maybe a couple of plays when they were younger. And I just want the experience of them to be a mix of things they're learning, but also some things that they've looked at and have had previewed for them so that they're grounded in the text and they feel somewhat confident when they watch a play version or read some things out loud in class. But when we're entering into Act 5 and we're entering into the closing moments of plays, I like to make it more about predictions than previews. So I think it's good if you're in a reading group looking at Hamlet or in a class looking at Hamlet at this point, after 5-1, as you're entering into the last scene, I think a good discussion is, what are all the different ways this play could end? Wise guys in my class will say, well, Hamlet's name's on the cover, which means he's probably going to die. That's fine. Maybe that's a starting point. I remember when Game of Thrones was ending, I was in a death pool with a variety of friends, and we were betting on which characters would live and die. I think you could do that with Hamlet. Which characters are gonna live and which characters are gonna die, and make a list, and then talk about why you think that list is gonna come true. I also would suggest, if you think, for example, Hamlet definitely has to die at the end of Hamlet, not just who's going to live or die is interesting, but what might be interesting about the way in which these characters die. So I would say make a death pool, and on the other side is what might be surprising in this scene. And the nice thing about predictions is that if you haven't read a play like Hamlet and a teacher asks you to make predictions, there's no pressure on being right. You don't know. Like, by definition, you haven't read it yet. But I just feel strongly that if you're making predictions, you have to draw upon your knowledge of the play and its patterns. And I think that's a good thought experiment. So this is going to be a short video. Just a reminder, what we do know is what's planned. And this is the nature of Shakespearean tragedy, that there is various, usually Act 3 or 4, there's a series of plans, often having to do with life and death. And we know that generally some elements of these plans come true and some elements of them don't exactly. So the plan is to dip Laertes' sword in a poison. So he's going to unbait his sword so it's sharpened at the end. And he's going to at some point stab Hamlet and kill him with a poison tip. Claudius, knowing, maybe, kind of like Hamlet, right, that Hamlet has a sort of authorial consciousness in a way. There are times I feel reading and watching Hamlet, he almost seems to know he's in a play. And at some points, he almost seems to want him to be writing his own play. Claudius hears Laertes' plans about the poisoning of the sword and says, well, okay, but we're in a tragedy, so let me come up with a backup plan. He doesn't say that literally. He's not that amazing, but he's going to poison his chalice. I don't think Claudius's chalice said poison chalice on it. That would be a bit of a spoiler. But anyway, this is how the play is supposed to end, with a fencing match and the death of Hamlet. The end. So maybe discuss, do you think it's going to happen as planned? Hint, it doesn't. There's some interesting moments between Hamlet and his last remaining friend, Horatio. Horatio's very wary. Laertes is an expert swordsman. Hamlet does say at one point, like, I'm not worried because for a long time I've been in continual practice, he says, continual practice. It's not in the play. It doesn't mean it's not true, but I just, with all of Hamlet's issues, him getting up and working out and him getting up and practicing fencing, it just seems strange, but it's what he says. And then, again, this goes back to my Act 5, Scene 1 reflection question. How is he different after the grave scene and the piracy and everything? he says to his friend Horatio, like basically, I know what I'm getting into, and it's sort of a life and death thing. He said, "There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it will be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all." We're all going to die, and we just have to be ready for that inevitability. And it's a very different comment on death than his soliloquies have given. And I just think that might be interesting to discuss. Um, but anyway, another thing to discuss is, what is Hamlet's end game? He enters into this fencing battle, right? Everybody there knows he killed Polonius. Everybody there knows, or Hamlet knows, that his king, who's feet away, has tried to have him killed. And he's back. So it's just such an odd, awkward space. We think of Act 1, Scene 2, where Hamlet is just sad and he hates his uncle who's married his mother. That's awkward. Well, this is far more awkward than that. And then I asked my students, who else could matter? Like, where are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern? We learn actually in Act 5, Scene 2 where they are. And the language is cryptic and difficult, so make sure you understand it. How might Gertrude play an interesting role? Are her loyalties torn, do you think? Like, after her discussion with Hamlet, is she more on Hamlet's side, or is she still on Claudius's side playing along? What do you think could happen there? And then this is a weirdly edited picture, but this is Fortinbras from the Brana movie. Where's he? He's edited out of most of the other movies, but the Brana movie being unabridged allows for this like geopolitical dimension with Fortinbras to be important. Is he going to play a part? Horatio, Claudius, like who else? What do you think is going to happen with these people? How might they contribute to the ending of the play? And I think something to think about is, what could be surprising? Could there be surprising plot points, a surprising entrance, a surprising death, a surprising choice? And I just think it's really good, before watching a film version or reading this, make a list on the board if you're a teacher with the students of possibilities. Again, no pressure on being right. They haven't read it or watched it yet. But I just think it's really interesting to hear all the possibilities, because as much of a classic as this is, and it's a classic as much as anything is a classic, at one point in the late 1500s, Shakespeare's looking at a blank piece of parchment, inventing this, making choices over other choices. So I just think it's good to be in that position as a class too, to imagine the possibilities. I'm not going to say what happens at the end. I'm going to tell you to pay particular attention to people's last words, Hamlet's last words, which are incredible. And also pay attention to the last speech of the play and whether it captures Hamlet. Pay attention to the last word of the play, which I think is endlessly interesting. Maybe a question to get is, does anyone get Hamlet at the end of the day? In the play, does anybody get him? And then what I ask at the end of Shakespeare tragedies is that at the end of all Shakespeare plays, when they were performed originally, the tradition was for theater of the time to conclude, and then for all the actors to get up and do a dance. And that was very popular. And the understanding was that even if it's a tragedy, we get to be in a theater and be entertained and have characters dress up and memorize lines for us and put on this imaginative work. So there's a sense of hope and celebration even in a tragedy. And I would just ask you, the end of Hamlet's really weird and disturbing. Would a dance make sense? Might be worth thinking about. And I don't know. I would love to hear your comments about Hamlet and about anything I'm saying, but also anything you're wondering about. I teach this play every year. I finished my 25th year in a row teaching it. And just to be really honest, I read it for the first time as an undergraduate. And I remember writing a paper on the to be or not to be speech. And I remember printing it out, thinking really confidently that I had grasped Hamlet. And I was 20. And I'm 48 right now, and I feel like I know so much less about him than I did then. And I've read it 25 more times. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this. And do you believe that it leaves the audience with a sense of hope? Or is it more just despair? Or is it something else? Anyway, I hope these these videos have helped you, please communicate in the comments, and I'd love to hear from you. Thanks.